Welcome to Complex Creatures, exploring spirituality and the common good.
Hello, welcome to Complex Creatures, our podcast looking at all things spirituality. Spirituality, as I often note, is relegated to personal growth and self-development. It's put in the domain of the individual. But the argument of this podcast, the interest in exploration, is to think about how spirituality can be a tool for the wider world, the public spaces, and even what you may or may not call the common good. I'm joined with my good buddy, Alan. Hi, Alan. How are you?
Hey, doing great, man.
Good. I know that before we logged on here, we're talking about our coffee habits and drinking coffee. So we're getting going earlier this morning. We thought we would shift up our approach for a little bit, maybe even a couple episodes. For those of you who know me, you'll know that my name, is Jarrod Longbonds, and I'm a senior minister of sort of a historic church in Midtown Atlanta, Georgia. Peachtree Christian is almost 100 years old, and in American years, that's old. I know if we were in the UK, that wouldn't be quite old, but it's an old church, and it's one of those kind of big bell tower with stained glass windows kind of places. And that's what I do day in, day out. I also have a PhD in theology and consider myself sort of a pastor theologian. I'd like to do more of the theological research than I get time to do, but I'm always reading and studying and thinking and teaching. And I just love all this stuff, spirituality, the meaning of life, theology, philosophy. I mean, it's not just a pursuit of work, it's a pursuit of passion. But sometimes all of that content just appears to people to be, theoretical or in the clouds, not practical. Of course, this podcast aims to show that it is has a lot of practicality. But in my own life, so back to the kind of biography, in my own life, 2 years ago, right around this very week, this very time 2 years ago, I was discovering that I was very, very sick, and I had not known it. And then right around Labor Day 2 years ago, I was rushed to the emergency room, full-on liver failure, and I was almost dead, as the doctor told me. I came out of the hospital, languished around the house for a week, talking to at least one liver specialist and kind of getting on an early plan of treatment. At that time, I also was still under the illusion I was going to go back to work really soon and that I could hide my ailment from people, but I got really bad later that week, and they rushed me to the ER, and I definitely almost died by hours at that time, and I was in kidney failure as well. And then there was arduous months of knowing that I had liver disease, and I was out of work, and ultimately I improved a lot, but I started the journey through organ or liver transplantation. And last October, I received a liver. And I've been, post-transplant since then. So I don't know how many months we're out now. We're coming up, I guess it's August still. We're coming up on nearly a year. And through that, I've known Alan, and for part of that, I've known Alan, and he's heard me talk a lot about that in sermons I preached or just in passing. I feel as though that this journey has been one where I've had to test out spirituality ideas. Sometimes I realized that what I taught, I don't practice as much. There have been insights, realizations, and all that. So for me, it's been a real spiritual pilgrimage as well as a physical one. I'm happy to tell everyone now I'm very healthy. But all that being said, Alan and I talked about maybe we would talk about this openly, this whole sickness to transplant health, and think about it in terms of the topics of this podcast. And actually, I want to turn it over to Alan to ask questions and to kind of start off a conversation. So this may take a little different approach. We don't know where it's going to go, but we hope you join us, and I hope there's something here for you. So, Alan, is that a good enough introduction?
I think so. So I've known Jarrod, I've known you for a little over a year now. We met when you called me talking about communication needs for the church and that sort of thing. And, at the time, I don't know that I realized that you were sick or on the transplant list or anything like that. It was a good solid month or so later before I realized what was going on with you. And, the very first thing that went through my head, to be honest with you, because, I've had a couple health scares myself, but not nearly what you've gone through. But the first thing that went through my mind was, were there any physical symptoms that led up to the initial liver failure? Like what were you feeling inside that eventually led to this?
Yeah. There's always those quotes that are attributed to Kierkegaard or whatever about life being lived can only be lived forward and interpreted backward, and or that general sense that hindsight gives us more than what we had and when we were walking through something, and that's true for me, because I think looking back now, I can look over the whole timing of COVID, and I had these moments and periods where I felt really nauseous, and I would feel like I would be driving in a car and I would all of a sudden feel like I was so nauseous I might get sick to my stomach. And so to kind of quell it, I would cough. And sometimes, I don't know, that the muscle movement would make my stomach kind of settled a little more. And that would just come periodically. And sometimes it came on because I was wearing a mask during COVID. Like I'd be in a store and the heat of it all would make me feel funny. And that's what I attributed it to a lot. But it happened in the car when I wasn't wearing a mask, or it happened when I was just sitting in my downstairs. And so at different points I'd carry Ritz crackers because it feels like if I just eat a cracker or something, it'd make me feel better. I think part of the problem, part of my sickness issue and my journey is that I had avoided going to the doctor for 5 years of physicals. I knew that my liver enzymes tended to be high since I was in my early 20s. I knew that I had family members who had fatty liver disease and that's in fact genetic. I drank alcohol. But most of the time when I would visit the doctor, it was always, well, we'll just keep an eye on it. It was not something that I felt urgent about. There's a lot more to be said about my phobias about the doctor. But in terms of the physical symptoms, I definitely had that. And when you look back on it, you're like, wow, that was a lot of being nauseated and a lot of funny feelings that you just really tried hard to overlook. And you tried very hard, or I guess you tried hard to explain away. And there were times I even got, physically sick to my stomach, and there was no real reason for it. And so that was over those long kind of arduous days of COVID, and my spiritual, physical, or emotional state was definitely one of languishing in that time. So it seemed like everything was kind of on the back burner. So it gave me a greater excuse to still avoid the doctor.
I understand. You're reminding me of when I had appendicitis. I had a bunch of feelings like that before I actually had to get it removed. Of course, liver transplant's a way bigger deal than appendicitis.
No, it's a good. I think that's a spiritual thing, because we tend to think in the Western world, especially, we tend to think of our lives in a dualistic sort of way. We got our inner life, or our soul, or our mind, and then we got our
right.
spirit, and then we got our outer life, and we even consider that not mind but brain, so brain, body, physicality. And if you go back to any of the great religions, the great Western Abrahamic faiths, and there is no dichotomy. And even Christianity, which is kind of gives the culture of the West the flavors it does spiritually. Sure. Just go back before the modern period, and there is not this stark duality. I mean, we are our bodies, and so listening to your body is I think a very important thing to do, not just for your health, but for your spirit, your spirituality.
No doubt.
I was ignoring it for sure.
So when, after you went to the hospital the first time and they told you that you were in liver failure, talk to me about what kinds of, sorry, man, I'm about to go personal real fast. What kind of conversations did you have with your wife about this? Were you aware at that time that it was near death and possibly going to get worse?
I think to start it, I had an incident that kind of tipped me over the scales, realizing something was really, really wrong. And I even avoided that for a few days until someone at work said, call a doctor, which I didn't have one. So I called someone who knew a doctor, and I said, would your doctor see me? And they had a personal relationship, and he texted the doctor, and the doctor called me from their home. And he's the one who said, drive to my office. You're either in a liver, kidney, or heart failure. And the 20-minute drive from my study and at the church to their medical building, I had turned Simpsons yellow, and my eyes looked like lightning bugs. That's what we say in the Midwest and South. We don't call them fireflies. We call them lightning bugs.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second to tell you this. I don't think I've ever mentioned it before. when I first met you, I thought that you were of mixed descent. I thought that maybe you were East Indian or something because of your coloration. Go on.
Yeah, 'cause by then I was very, very tan all the time. And sometimes that over the journey, people would say in my neighborhood, "You're looking good. You look Italian now." Like it was like you're more Mediterranean. It was like, so I went through all these shades of jaundice from just yellow to more tan, which I could live with tan, but the other. So on that drive, I called my wife and she didn't ask too many questions. And in my back of my mind, I knew this was going to become hard for us because not only had I avoided the doctor, but that had bothered my wife and I'd known that. And that I made a resolution that was my 40th year of life, before my 41st birthday, I would, which is in October. And this is, near Labor Day-ish, just right around now, actually. Toward the end of last week of August, I had promised that I would go get a physical. She didn't even ask me. It was just kind of my own, like, I'm going to do this. Like it was a heroic act or something. And there were times that my phobia of going to the doctor was mixed with also this strange psychological sense of doom and dread that I just knew at times that I was really, really sick and dying and I had some sort of irreparable cancer. And I would look to my wife and I would tell her I was worried about it. And my wife, like any logical human being, and also my friends knew about my neuroses. They would say, well, then go to the doctor. And then I would say, well, no. Because the idea was then if I was kind of living with Schrodinger's cat always, if I went, then it was going to be decided yes or no. But if I didn't, then it was still possible that I wasn't sick and dying, None of this makes sense. It's not what I would have been told anyone else to do. It doesn't follow actually what I believe about the world. It was sort of a magical thinking. It was superstition. It was fear, and it was a whole lot of avoidance. And I wasn't in a mentally healthy place with it. So I knew when I called her and told her I'm rushing to the hospital, this is what's happening. I knew that she was going to be upset with me, but I knew at first she was going to be concerned. She met me. She could see it with her eyes across the parking lot that I was bad. We got up to the doctor's office. He didn't even inspect my body. He said, "You're in liver failure." They sent me right down. And then basically 5 minutes after, Alan, I started hallucinating. I wish I could say the word really well, but it's hepatic encephalopathy, I think is how you say it. This is the basically the toxins in your body that your liver helps expel back up, right? And they mess up your brain and you start speaking with slurry, mushy speech. I thought I was speaking eloquently and fine, but the doctor looks at my wife and just quits talking to me and starts talking to her. And that's the first sign. Oh, things aren't right. And then I start hallucinating. So now I get out of the hospital and I come home and it's just my poor wife. My kids, thankfully, are with grandparents in another state. And then my parents who are living with us during COVID, they're on a cruise in Alaska. I forbade her to tell them so they didn't want them to ruin their trip. But that meant she was just me and her. And I was wily like a drunk toddler. I fell down the stairs. I was insistent that I can control my own body. And I ran away from her. I tried to drive to the store to get fruit. She had to stop me. I mean, she said in the store that I don't have any memory of it. I was running into things. I tell you all that because it took a while for me to get to a healthy enough place to be able to have conversations with her. And after about a week or so in, I realized she was deeply, deeply angry and hurt. It took months for me to realize that she had felt anger toward me because I had put her in a position for years of assuring me that I was fine. And she hated feeling that responsibility. She really felt like he needs me to say, "You're okay, don't worry about it." And that she's not a doctor. And she knew that I wasn't doing the right thing by not going to the doctor. And so she felt like that was a lot of responsibility I foisted upon her. She's always taken the approach that if I'm not worried about something like a behavior I'm doing, that she's not going to parent me. So sometimes that meant that she put up with stuff that she didn't like me doing and didn't fight me about it. And I think that's kind of that's a healthy aspect of our marriage. Like if I was going to have a cigar, she wasn't going to lecture me about how unhealthy cigars were. She knows that I know. And so that harping on it was going to be an argument. And this is something she always told me. but she didn't like it. Now, I think now she would probably say that augment some of her attitudes for how to handle that. But my point being,
Sure.
is through all of it, it made her feel like she was the responsible party for my health, and that she resents. Dog is barking. I don't hear that. And that made her feel a lot of pain, made her feel alone, made her feel isolated, and it took her a long time. I could feel for months, I could feel her being emotionally in some way disconnected from me. I knew she loved me. I knew she was caring for me, but the intimacy, any intimacy of just like moments of like just sweetness, I could tell there was pain right under the surface just talking with her, and it was a lot. And we almost saw a therapist together. I saw my own therapy, and that therapist really helped me kind of think less selfishly about it. I mean, not to say that I was walking around as a selfish rube, but like it was painful to me to have my wife feel those feelings. Even like moments when I'm getting better, like we go to the doctor, good report, my wife would be excited about the report. I'm feeling better and I can do more things in life again. But then when we have a larger, more intimate conversation, maybe I even take her out to dinner. If I could make that happen in the conversation, I could tell that there was just like, we're not completely connecting. It's not, there's just this something, and so it would hurt me. So then I go talk to my therapist, and then I have to think again, kind of remember how selfish and myopic we can all be. And so I needed to expand my understanding.
What kind of conversations did you have with your therapist that helped you? Like, was there, digging into the subject of the podcast itself, were there specific, emotional or spiritual tools that the therapist helped you wrestle with at that time?
Well, it depends. Sometimes we did mindfulness exercises. My therapist is a psychoanalyst, but he's personally also a Christian. And so I could always use my Christian grammar and my spiritual grammar, and it made sense to him, and he could speak back. So he helped connect some dots between the psychological and the more practically spiritual. But so we did some mindfulness things, because when I was in that, there were stages coming out of that for months where I was very much a shell of myself. I lived a very restricted life. I had a very hard time getting up off the floor. I had a hard time staying awake. I couldn't walk around the block. I had a cane. And so I would just like get up in the morning, try to be present for the kids. Very, 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 very poor at doing that, by the way. Very irritable, a lot of pain. My senses were heightened, the volume hurt, and then I'd be exhausted. So then I would find myself downstairs in our den on the floor, at movie and television on or whatever, and just pass out of sleep for several hours. And I try to get myself up hard. It take 10 minutes to get up off the floor, try to walk, down to the mailbox and back, So sometimes talking to him was these mindfulness practices to try to learn how to be present in the now, as opposed to living in regret, living in the fear of the past, living in, that, or living in the fear of anxiety of the future, but to try to live presently. And then there were times, I would say there's a lot of times where I was trying to learn the perspective my wife might have. So there's a lot of just like talking out loud thought experiments. And gilding all of these practices, there's a refrain that he often uses, which is just kind of something for me perpetually, as the kind of person I am, is a lot of you need to be kind to yourself, because I do a lot of what's the word? I do a lot of self, I beat myself up a lot.
What? Flagellation.
Self-flagellation, yeah. That he saw me kind of whipping myself with my invisible whips. But I do a lot of that, just kind of as a matter of my personality. And so there was just a lot of that. Very early on, actually, he actually sent me an email saying, I was so out of it during a session that he was thinking about suspending talking to me, because the hepatic encephalopathy so bad. I was very, very bad in that session. And then we met 2 weeks later, and I had improved so much. And he was like, man, I'm so thankful, because like you weren't here. And
sure.
One reason why my life was restricted, Alan, Colleen did not let people from the church call me or friends. She said, just call her, because she didn't want me to be embarrassed because I was very cogent for a while.
Sure. Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because that was about to be my next question was, do you have any friends that you were talking to about this when this was going on? Did she allow you to talk to friends?
In the hospital, the second time so the first time I went to the hospital, when I first met the doctor, that was like a 2-day, maybe. I'd have to ask her if it was 2 or 3 days. I feel like just like the weekend there, and then they sent me home. And then later that next weekend, I went in for 6 days, just over a week. And while I was there, that hospital still had pretty severe COVID restrictions. Now, in Atlanta, as a minister, I go to hospitals. This was probably like the longest held COVID restriction hospital. So I could only have one person per day. And so if my wife came at 9 a.m. and left at 10, she couldn't come back again. So Colleen often stayed all day. And we fibbed the hospital. In our denomination, we don't have bishops, but we have a regional minister. And we brought her in and told everyone she was my bishop so she could see me. And then we brought another minister from another one of our churches who's a good friend of mine in, and we called him my pastor. Okay. He sat me down and he said, "You need to go on medical leave, dude, and your church needs to support it." He was very emphatic that part of what made me sick was not just like genetics or not alcohol, but he was listening to what we heard from the doctors. It was also my stress. And so he's like, you need to get well and quit worrying about working. Following that up was that regional minister who knows us both. And she said, Jarrod, I'm going to leave here. I'm going to go to the chair of the board and I'm going to tell him what you need. She left my bedside and drove to my house, met with my mom and my mother-in-law, who was in town because of all this. She prayed with them. And then she drove down to Midtown and she met with the chair of the board and whomever else and said, "Jarrod needs some time." And they said, "Absolutely." And she said, "He doesn't need to even hear about what's going on at the church." And the church folks took care of it. They took, and one of our colleagues, Katie, as you know, stepped up in a big, big way. I hired Brooks to work with me. We hadn't even worked together yet for 6 months. He stepped up in a big, big way. And Jim and Dee and all those others that and they all stepped up in huge ways. And I did not talk to people from the church unless it was a very short talk. I had probably lunches with a few staff members over the course of those 6 months. We'd go to lunch at 11 a.m. so we could beat a crowd and I would be away from people because of I was very susceptible. And then I had 2 other friends in town that I saw twice over those 6 months for lunch. And then beyond that, some of my close friends from elsewhere who I've had for years and years and years, they came down for my birthday in October. So this happened around Labor Day. They came down, and I think 2 out of the 3 might have thought this might be the last time they're coming to see me. I mean, it was not out of the woods. And I didn't want to be seen. I didn't put it on social media. I looked gone. I lost a lot of weight that wasn't healthy weight. So, I lost a lot of weight, but then I lost the muscles around your eyes. Everything's sunken in, and I was brown and yellow and all that in ways that I shouldn't be. And it was just embarrassing for me. I'm too vain. So I didn't talk to many people. I talked to my therapist. I talked to my wife. I talked to my doctors. I talked to my therapist, and then I started spiritual direction. So I chose a spiritual director and went once a month to him to talk because I couldn't go to church for worship.
Sure.
I thought, well, I believe, so I better do something about that. That is more than just me sitting in my private, quiet, mental space.
Understood. So how long was it before you started feeling well enough to go back to work? Because when I met you, you were back at work, and I think that was about almost a year after.
No, it was.
That's what we're talking about now.
It was from Labor Day of that year to February.
Okay.
And, I started feeling pretty all right. I bounced back in a relatively fast way. I don't know what month it was, but there's 2 things. One, I bounced back in a relatively quick way for someone who had what I had.
Sure.
Which turned out to be cirrhosis. We did not advertise that. And I still don't, because when people hear that, they think, "Oh, you're an alcoholic." And so I have this sense of shame about it, but
sure,
announce it to people because they didn't really know or tell me that for several months. Now, cirrhosis is literally, your liver has scar tissue, and it's the scar tissue that won't regenerate. we all know that our liver is one of the most regenerative organs. You know, it's a workhorse, and it's a miracle. It's a miraculous thing. But the scar tissue, it's gone too far. And you can have cirrhosis from alcohol, and you can have it from fatty liver, and you can have it from other things as well. So, but my doctor explained to me that, my doctors explained that I have a confluence of things, and also my body simply does not treat and handle these things well. So where was I going with that? Let me just say that. Okay, so I did bounce back quickly for someone in that situation, but I also was operating under the delusion that I was better than I was, and that can be illustrated by, like, a day I'd go see the specialist every Friday, and Colleen would go with me, and I went in, and she'd come in. Her name was Suki, Dr. Suki Han. She'd come in, and she would be like doing like an Ellen DeGeneres dance, really excited. She'd say, "Your numbers are great," and I'm like, "Wow, it's Friday. It's one of these fall days that is like." Cool and warm and nice in Atlanta, and so I'm like, I'm gonna celebrate it. I call my dad. I go, let's go play 9 holes of golf, right?
Man.
And golf. Everyone makes fun of golf as not being very athletic. So you sit in a cart and you drive around.
Sure.
And what's 9 holes? I'm just gonna swing here, swing there.
Right.
And we get there. We get in the cart, and we're driving up the first tee. My dad goes, "My goal for you is 6 holes," I think he said. I go, 6? What are you talking about? And it was a hot day. It's like 90 some degrees. And we stepped on the first tee. Ironically, the 2 guys I'm golfing with are these retired Korean doctors. They were liver doctors. I'm telling them what's going on with me, and I'm, a little bit, and they're like, "Oh," and they're asking me questions, and I don't know what they were thinking, but I remember I put the ball on the tee, and I just completely I can top the ball. I hit it terribly. And I was all of a sudden, I'm feeling that, I don't feel great in my tum-tum. Hit the ball. Okay, now I hit another one. And I'm, okay, that's fine. We go down to it, hit it, get up on the green, and we drive to the second hole. And I look at my dad and I go, I can't do this. And he goes, "Okay, let's leave." And I told this guy, "Sorry guys, I'm not ready." And I couldn't make it more than 1 hole. It just zapped me.
Oh my gosh.
And I was feeling so good, And,
Sure.
And so, I'm thinking on bounce back. So by the time you met me, I'd been back at work in February, which was an incredibly difficultly strange sort of experience to come back. And
hey, talk about that for a minute. Talk about coming back to work for a second, because what I would imagine, here's what goes on in my head, and you tell me how wrong I am. What I would imagine is that after being out of the gig for that long, when you come back, I would feel a little superfluous. Like, do they really need me? They've been functioning with me for.
Absolutely. I actually wonder to this day if I had any value. But that's also already plays on my personality, my own peccadillos of the mind. But yeah, man, by this point, we're talking February, we got through Christmas, like people are telling you you're looking good, I'm probably tan, but not, I'm still, that's jaundice tan, because it's like middle of winter and I got a pretty dark tan going. And, I've been working out a lot. I could not at that. I was not supposed to do the kind of exercise that I like. If I could have had my druthers, Alan, I'd been kickboxing with heavy bags and things, or doing jujitsu, definitely some moderate weightlifting, but not allowed to do any of it. I could swim and I could walk. So I began swimming at the Y, which I'm not good at to this day, lap swimming, but I love it, because when I get in the water, I'd either it'd be like meditation, or I'd have tons of ideas. So I had loads of ideas for work, for creating, for the church and all that stuff. And I would take these walks. Sometimes I would go to the Y and swim, and then I'd go to the park, and there's a loop around 2.5 miles around a golf course, and I would just walk it, and I'd listen to books on Audible, or I'd podcast, or I'd just be quiet. I had an experience with a spiritual experience on one of these walks I can talk about another time, but I would just do that, and then I'd come home, and I was like, man, I put in all this time kind of being active physically that I felt it makes you feel good, right? So I come back to work, and quite clearly I'm wondering, do they really want me back? We mentioned our colleague Katie. She went from she grew up in our church. She had a full-time ministry position years ago, and she's beloved. she stepped out of that role and she had her third baby. And then I brought her back out of that for a part-time specialty role with the hopes that eventually I convinced her to move into the kind of chief administrative position, which she is. She's our executive minister. While I'm gone, they said, hey, we need you to run the show. So she does that. And she's an incredibly winsome person. She's very, very talented, very gifted, and then my new associate I hired that I didn't ever get to work with, he's got a very affable personality and makes people feel light and stuff.
Sure.
Where do I fit in? And I'm worried that coming back, what I say and do in my leadership is going to make people feel like I'm stepping all over them on staff. So I needed to be cautious and careful about what they've done and respect it. But also, how do I kind of also come back in as like, well, I'm still asked and called to lead. And I'm not by nature an autocratic sort of leader.
Sure.
I kind of have this belief that you ought to get in line following because you want to. So like, I really here's the vision and get excited. Let's get on board. Let's go together. And I want to hear how you can be a part of it. It's more of a consensus building, team building sort of mentality for me, I think anyway. And so, I didn't know how I'd be received. I got into the pulpit and I know the first two sermons were particularly long, about double the length. The first one was kind of what happened. Sure. By the time I did the second one, though, that was too much. People started letting me know. It's like, okay, not a lot of grace room. And, that's the way it is, I guess. But, it was just kind of, I knew that specifically with the associate that I hired named Brooks, we joke on thinking about the Enneagram that he's an 8. So he's a little distrusting of authority, a little more cynical about it. And
Sure.
He sees where people are unjust with their power. And I could see talking to him at times that he's not fully on board with me, or he's not sure how to take what I'm saying. And I even remember the day I might have won him over. I even think I remember, but I knew that I needed to prove to him that my intentions were good and noble and not vainglorious.
Right. I get it.
And it would have been made much more difficult. It was just naturally difficult because of my personality and my worries, but it would have been made much harder if the team weren't so hospitable to me, and they were hospitable. They made it work. It's nothing they could probably go on a podcast to talk about the leadership failings that I had during that time. I only had any success because of what they'd done. And I only sit at the head of the table because they say it's okay for me to do so. That's what I think.
I understand that. I do. Well, so you get back to work. Talk to me a little bit more about what your wife is going through, because what I'm expecting, if this had happened in my family, and that's, so I'm always drawing a parallel here because I'm trying to figure out what you experienced. If this had happened in my family, my wife would be freaking out about not only me and all of her feelings about me, but frankly, also about how she was going to make ends meet if I were to die.
Yeah. So there's so much humor in all of the way I behave because I'm really just often a jerk, and I don't mean to be, but I am. They would fuss over me. My mom would fuss over me, my sister, my wife, and and I made a lot of people upset with how I responded. And I got talking tos a lot. And I had to learn I think through a lot of it, I had to learn how to be human again. And I could talk, there's more than one episode here, but the fussing, did you wash your hands or something like that would be asked. And the line, and I was doing this when I was in my brain mush in the hospital, but they make fun of me to this day. They'd say, I'm 40 years old and I have a PhD. I think I know how to wash my hands, that's the kind of thing. So did you wear your mask when you were in front of all these people? I'm 40 and I'm a PhD, I'm an accomplished human being. I think I know to wear a mask, yeah, I'm complete and utter tool, man. But I think my wife would have been just as pleased with me had I decided to never work again. I think that she's supportive of what I do, but I think she would have been like, look, Jarrod, we can sell our house. We can live on my income if we live somewhere much, much more affordable than where we live in Atlanta. And she's like, I don't want for all sorts of fancy bells and whistles. She's not like that. So she's like, let's go live in a small town and let's raise our chickens because we have chickens. We garden. We're those kinds of people.
Mm-hmm.
And you can stay home with the kids, or you can teach, or you can write, or you can. She wanted me to do whatever wouldn't kill me, and she still thinks that way. So she's supportive of what I do, but she gets real concerned if she sees me overly concerned or overly worrying about the opinions of other people, or feeling frustrated, stress from external circumstances, which is simply something that I've always needed to work on. And when we talked about detachment in other episodes, like these are areas I'm learning to detach from, just a work to do. So that's it. I think mostly my wife's just worried that I'm alive, and she's got a very sort of positive attitude about what we can do. She also thinks that I can do anything. I think she thinks that I could probably start my own business today here in this little workstation in my house, and I'd somehow be successful. Now, I try to disabuse her of that all the time. I'm very limited in things that I can do. But so she's more or less just looking on the side of a worry that I'm going to overdo it. And then because I'm on this side of a liver transplant. I'm not a year out yet, but I'm healthy, man. I mean, being a transplant patient means you're more like you have a chronic situation. But man, I'm alive, I'm healthy, things are working, and I take my meds, and about 2 in a minute, actually take the meds. But, sometimes I forget that, I still am a liver transplant patient, which means that I get burned down. And so I need to rest. I need to not go.
Sure.
And so like, I'll be like, I got up 2 weeks ago and I'm like, I'm not feeling that great, feeling just a little, she goes, you're worn down. I go, yeah, that's a good expression of it. She says, yeah, you work 16 hours on Monday and Tuesday. It's Wednesday morning. She goes, you have to slow down.
Right.
It's going to catch up with you faster than it'll catch up with someone else. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's natural. Put the brakes on, take a breather. So that's kind of how she thinks. If that makes sense.
Sure. I gotcha. Okay. So I'm trying to think through this entire process chronologically. So somewhere in here, I believe that you didn't know if you were going to need a liver transplant. Like you were thinking that it was just going to recover. Is that an accurate statement or no?
Oh, yeah. I was taking my pills. I think if you talk to my wife, I think she thought that I probably would and probably should. I, at one point in the doctor's office, really expressed the desire not to need transplant. In my ill-informed mind, a transplant sounded like a failure. A transplant would take time. And I thought if I got a transplant, that would mean that I just was out of work for 6 months, and it wasn't a sabbatical, but I already know that I have enough people who don't believe in sabbaticals in my world, which is kind of
sure.
But yeah, if you have never had one, I understand the need for a vocational job where you're never off. But nevertheless, it was a sabbatical, yet that's how it sort of functioned. I needed the time to get my whole health of my mind, body, spirit.
Sure.
And so I thought, well, that's already asking a lot. And to the church's credit, to the people's credit, I mean, they supported me morally, spiritually, and financially. They didn't stop paying me. They didn't say, oh, we can't pay you. And I always felt the mix of shame and gratitude for that. I'm from the Midwest. We do shame and guilt very well. And so there was just a feeling of shame about it. Like I didn't earn my bread, as it were. But they did I think what was the right thing. And I was afraid that, I would lose everything. Oh, now I have to have a transplant. Certainly I'm not going to be leading any longer in the role that I'm leading. Certainly they don't want to pay me, blah, 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 blah. And it, like my wife was assuring me, we don't need anything. We'll be okay. Sure. And when it came to push comes to shove, it wasn't my fear of the material. It was my fear of, it was the attachments. It was like, this is who I am. This is what I do. Right. And
sure.
And too much identifying myself with it as opposed to, or by it, as opposed to letting it be just one aspect of my life. It was kind of me. And so I was very afraid of it. Come around the winter, I'd lost a lot of weight in a negative way. And then because I was exercising and eating better, and I wasn't drinking alcohol, which is just full of calories. I had lost weight and I was looking healthier and fitter. And in fact, pretty good shape. But then I started retaining water from the sodium. So I was on a low sodium diet, and it was just like bothering me. And I kept doing searches and it's called ascites. I was like, will I ever be able to lose this ascites? You get all these websites. And basically, like, the number one way to really fix it is, in my situation would be, liver transplantation. I remember one night I got into a tailspin. My family and I joined the Atlanta, or the Atlanta Mushroom Finders Club. I was really into studying fungi, and
Okay.
I got really interested in studying stuff when I was sick. That was just a fascination to me. And so I wanted us to learn more about mushrooms. And so we were about to Zoom in my den over here on the TV, a talk with a big speaker and everything about mushrooms. I mean, I'm so neurotic and crazy and weird. I thought that my 5-year-old kid would think this is cool. But anyway, of course, no one wanted to watch. So
we need to have a bigger conversation about this later on, but go on.
Well, meanwhile, I'm just in despair. And my wife keeps looking at me going, why are you in despair? And I tell her about what I'm reading, and she's like, honey, she's so not interested in my water retention. It just doesn't, none of it, I'm vain. She's like rolling her eyes at me. She remembers what's important. And then she's also like, look, hon, it may be a good thing to have the transplant. It may be good. And so she kept saying, I think the outcomes are actually much better than you realize. I should also say that someone along the line that I knew told me that they had a loved one that was sick and got a transplant and still died. And so that was in my head. And so I guess I was going to cure myself with medicine, the doctor's advice, and good diet and exercise. And every time I saw that doctor after the winter, we went from once a week to every other week to once a month to now we were out 4 or 5 months. So I go see her, Dr. Hahn. She comes in, and this is the end of spring. And she says to me, these are her words. She says, you have come heroically further than we have thought you would come. You have improved in ways that we didn't think you would. She is, by the way, I need to say, not a very touchy-feely sort of doctor. She's pretty blunt and pretty, straight. So she never really gave me the Mormon cuddlies. It was very direct. So by saying you have come heroically further than we thought you would come, I knew that that meant something. And she said, I just don't know that you're ever going to get your MELD score, which is a cumulative score that says where you are in the need for a transplant. I don't know if you're ever going to get it better than this. She said, if I were you, I would get working on getting on the transplant list. And I do believe I just sat there stoically looking at her, and just one little tear welling up in my eye. I was fighting it all back. I was just trying to be present to listen to what she said. And she said, look, man, I know you don't want to do this. She said, but if you do it, you go through, it's such a process. If it turns out you need it, and liver disease can take a southward turn on a dime. She goes, if you need it, you'll be ready. And if you don't, if you never need it, then you don't have to take it when, you don't have to do it. So it's just better, it's smarter to do that. So I said, then that sounds like the thing to do. She walks out of the room, the tear falls down my cheek. My wife gives me a knowing, loving, pat on the back, and we sit there in silence. And I had to drive from there to the church for an executive committee meeting. And at that time, I got stuck in traffic. It took 45 minutes. And in 45 minutes, I went through all the stages of grief. Wow. I was angry. I was like, are you kidding me? She told me my brother's look, take part of my liver, because you can do partial liver donation. And, but she basically said, your liver is so far gone that you need a whole liver. It would risk your brother's health and life and it risks it not working. And then and your wife, she's too small. You're too much larger than her. She was going through all these things, right? And it's and I'm like, I know people who live a hard life with drugs and alcohol. And I'm like, are you kidding me? They're fine. And I went through the anger, and I went through the whole thing in the car ride, and I had tears. And by the time before that meeting, I was meeting with a chair of the board as a friend of mine at a taco place. And I walked in and I sat down, and he's a cynical, sarcastic sort of guy. And I said, looks like I'm going to have a transplant. He goes, great news. He goes, man, you're progressing. And he made some sort of dark joke like, hey, you're either going to die or like you're going to live. It's going to be great. Like, and our friendship is such that like he could say it to me, and the absurdity, and also like the absurdity of the truth.
Sure.
Crack up laughing. And by the time I was done and we walked into that executive committee meeting, I had like accepted it, and it was something I was doing, and it was good. My therapist later said, "Man, you processed quickly." And I said, "Well, I think to be fair, I have been processing for months, this potentiality, you know, this was just like acceptance bit." So that's kind of what happened. And it took me that summer to get on the list, and I was on it in October of last year, and it took me 2 weeks, and then I got a liver, which is incredible.
It is. And before we get there though, I have another question that leads up to the transplant, and we're coming close to time. So I think this might be the last question for today, and then we'll follow up with another episode. Did you explore any homeopathic or alternative medicine along the way?
Yeah. So I think that not directly with this treatment, I would hear things from people. Everyone's got a remedy or a thing.
Opinions. Yeah. Sure.
And I believe that. I believe in, you know, I believe in the health aspects of a lot of Eastern things and tea and a lot of stuff. But I believe in science as well. I mean, so basically when I'm sitting there hearing about, what is it? Oh, I'm dropping the name of the herb that's put in tea, and it's also people take it and it's for their liver. Milk thistle.
Okay.
You know, I'm hearing people talk about milk thistle, and you know, when I have liver doctors that say there are some suggestions that it could help, but it's not FDA proven, blah, 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 blah. And then, you know, one doctor told me along the way, and I don't know if this is still the orthodoxy, but it's like, you know, your body still has to process all these things through the liver. And so sometimes by picking up stuff on, you know, it just makes your liver work harder. Here's something, you know, so, you know, I try to drink a lot of lemon water. I try to drink more thistle and green teas and things of that nature. But I was assured by my liver specialist at this point in time that it was far too gone for things of that nature, and I needed some pretty specific medicine.
Sure.
Along the way, I decided I was going to get into herbology or be an herbalist because I love teas and I like to make teas. And so I started reading a lot about it. But then I discovered that a lot of tinctures and teas and things that I could take or that I would make counteract a lot of medications I have. And one of the very few dietary tragedies that I'm restricted to in my post-transplant diet is I can no longer have green tea because my medicine specifically keeps my immune system low so that my body won't reject the liver.
Right.
But things that boost your immunity, like green tea, counteract that. So I'm not allowed to have it. And I love green tea. Always have loved it. So now I got to be careful, and I can't go more into that. Listen, Alan, there's a way in which we'll talk. Next time we talk, I want to, if you don't mind, when you think about questions, I want to tell you at least a couple spiritual experiences I had in this journey.
Of course.
But for right now, I just want to I'm just thinking out loud at how you've asked questions. And what I've talked about, I think about the real importance of listening to your own body, and I think it's been very important. And then listening and how you are engaging in truth telling with your loved ones. I mean, that's something that I mean, I just you brought a lot up about my wife's interactions. There's more to say, but there are ways in which I caused my own problems from not allowing I put a veil up between truth, the possibility of truth telling with my wife and I about my health, or, you know.
We've got a few minutes. Talk about that for just a moment, and then we'll cut it today. But tell me a little bit about how you hindered truth telling in this situation.
Well, I mean, very specifically what made her upset, right, was I would say things like, you know, I'd have this lump feeling in my throat. And I mean, like, I'm pretty certain I have esophageal cancer. Now, I mean, what are the reasons why? Well, I struggle with reflux, or I used to struggle with reflux. And then I find out I have a hiatal hernia, which often causes the reflux. And in a person of my age and the lack of severity of it, there is no real intervention for it. But reflux over time can cause esophageal cancer. I also smoked some cigars in my life. So therefore, that feeling, that's got to be that, right? Now, a lot of people say, well, it could be a lot of other things too, but you still say, well, if you're feeling something, go see someone, right? And my wife and my friends and people told me that, but I was terrified to go, and I explained that. So I that's that. But then because I have this ruminating mind, I'd be sitting around doing whatever, and I'd get in this mindset like, I'm unhealthy, and I'm unhealthy, I'm unhealthy, I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm dying. Just get someone to tell me you're okay. So I look at my wife and I'd say, I'm all right? I'm cool? Like, I'm fine? And she'd say, you're fine, honey. She felt forced to do that when she wants to say, yeah, I think you're fine, but I really think you should go to the doctor. It would make everything better. Plus, you're going to find out that you need to change some things about your life. And I didn't want to go to the doctor because I also didn't want to feel like I was in trouble.
You had to change some things.
Change some things about your life, right? And so because I would shorthand it from a conversation to, I'm good, right? And sometimes I would need her to tell me that. I would need her to tell me that, right? That put a lot of pressure on her, and that's the hardship I put on our relationship. But I also, it was a shorthand that kind of made it such that there was not a real heartfelt truth telling when in any form of community that is healthy spiritually. That's something that does happen. Whether you want to call it accountability or confession, sometimes even the offering of forgiveness. These are moments of truth telling that we do with each other. Not to rub people's face in their sins or their baloney, but we hold mirrors up to each other. And the more intimate and intense the relationship, and marriage is supposed to be amongst the highest of that, we're holding up a more defined mirror. So we're not just being perceived, but we're perceiving the perception of ourselves. So in an honest, true, intimate relationship, it's an opportunity for our own self-improvement. But just as much as we can lie to ourselves, we can use relationships to also lie to ourselves.
Absolutely. So I don't think you have time to answer this one today, but I'm going to tell you one of the questions I have for you for our next conversation, so that you can be thinking about it. My next big question really is, just as you mentioned earlier in our conversation, you were talking about the idea that we aren't spiritual, physical, mind. We're all of those things. We're not one, we're all, or it's a combination. Those things are intrinsically linked. Were there any ways in which what was going on with you physically was mirrored with what was going on with you spiritually? In other words, in the process of your health failing, were there spiritual implications to that? Were there things that you had to, resolve in your spirituality in order for you to come to the place where you were ready for this transplant?
Yeah, so I'll say yes, and I'll look forward to talking next time. If we think about today almost as the introduction to the health side in the health journey, next time can really mirror that on the spiritual side. And I am working on writing about this, and my working title is called Jaundiced Spirituality, because I wasn't just, and so maybe that tips my cap to the answer, but I think that's something good to, I'll think through it, and next week we'll break out questions about that. So yes, I'm looking forward to it, Alan. Thank you for your questions.
All right.
I know that you've probed deeply, but thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Sure, man.
All right, my friends.
Until next time.
Okay, see you later.